Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. It's August, the state primary is just weeks away, campaigns are running out of time, and we have 3 candidates here today, so we want to jump right into interviews, starting with a Republican candidate for Congress in the 2nd District, Vikram Maheshwaramani. Vikram, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Adam. Thrilled to be back.
Yeah, the race for president really is setting the tone for everybody across the board. It gets so much attention, unfortunately, for better or worse for you guys in the congressional races. For the Democrats, the switch to Kamala Harris seems to have caught Republicans a little bit on their back foot somewhat. Let's take a listen to what former President Donald Trump had to say at the National Association for Black Journalists conference this last week.
Okay.
I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
So when former President Trump comments on someone's racial identity, is he helping his cause?
No, I don't think so, Adam. I mean, look, there's a lot of reasons to talk about what Kamala Harris represents, what she offers the American people, and frankly, I think that record by itself speaks for itself, right? She's been for open borders. She's absolutely against fossil fuels. She is against a lot of things that Republicans stand for. And so whether it's the economy, the inflation, whether it's the border, the problems, whether it's some of the other dynamics that are really, I mean, look, the world's on fire and she's got her fingerprints on all of this. The reality is, I don't think we need to talk about race. We can talk about competency, or in this case, in my opinion, the lack thereof.
You know, Republicans have a truly remarkable record in the 2nd District going back a decade now, nominating people of color, conservatives of color, in 4 out of the last 5 election cycles. Could be 5 out of 6 if it's either you or Lily Tong Williams this year. But when you hear the congressional Republicans you want to join calling Vice President Harris, quote, a DEI hire or the DEI vice president, how do you think that lands beyond the base of the party?
Yeah. Adam, it's not helpful. Look, again, we have a record to look at in the case of Kamala Harris, and that record speaks for itself. She was the border czar. The border's wide open. She wants to get rid of, she wants electric vehicles. She wants to get rid of gas-powered vehicles. She wants to get rid of your gas stove. She wants to take away guns. She wants to do everything that is anti-Republican. I think the contrast is clear. We don't need to get into the fact, race or whatever. Look, when I get on a plane, Adam, I want a pilot who knows how to fly a plane. I don't really care what their skin color is. I don't care what their sexual orientation is. If I, God forbid, end up in an operating room, I want a surgeon who knows what they're doing. I think we should focus on competency, not skin color.
You know, Social Security is going to be a huge issue, not just now, but as we get farther into the 21st century here. So should Social Security exist in its current form for the workers who are in their 20s right now, just entering the workforce?
Yeah, look, so my overall theory here is promises made, promises kept. Those who have paid in, it's their money. They deserve to get it. Now, your question is really about younger folks in their 20s. And I think there we do have to reset expectations. We have to start talking about a different system. But look, Adam, if we get the economy of the United States going faster, less regulation, a lot of the stuff President Trump implemented in his first term, I think this economy will grow quicker. That will buy us time to make these adjustments. But yes, Social Security, for the youngest folks, those who are not even in the workforce, needs to be rethought.
Is privatization something that should be on the table?
You know, I think we need to look at everything. But right now, I think the key is if we get our economy growing, we'll buy ourselves time, and these adjustments can take place over time with younger folks. Older folks, those who are expecting retirement, those who have paid in, they deserve it. That's their money.
Parallel to what we see going on over in Israel, there's a problem here in the United States with anti-Semitism. I'm interested to know what you think. When anti-Semitism doesn't rise to the level of a crime, when there's not a criminal act involved, is that something that should be addressed by the government, or is that a cultural problem that needs to be addressed by culture and community?
Well, both, I would argue, for a couple of reasons. Culture is formed oftentimes by policy, by what elected leaders speak, what they say, by what the leaders of these institutions on campuses have said. When you have people actually calling for death to America, actually going further, calling for, from the river to the sea, where students don't even know what that means, that's a problem because it's intimidating others. So I'm okay with free speech. I'm okay with peaceful protest. I'm not okay with intimidating others and preventing a culture that should be open to diversity of ideas and open debate. that's preventing it. And so that's not the academic institution's objective. We need to stop that. And honestly, that may mean foreign students that are protesting and saying, hey, death to America, let's pull their visas and deport them. You know what else? If an academic institution is not willing to treat everyone equally, you know what? Maybe they don't deserve tax incentives. Maybe they shouldn't stay as tax-exempt institutions if they're so anti-American.
You know, you were taught at Ivy League schools. Did you see that this fomenting of anti-Semitism even then?
Well, so there were definitely signs, Adam, that there were, let's just say, a focus on certain viewpoints is perhaps the right way to say it. Certain political dispositions. Diversity of perspective was not valued as much as I would have hoped in an academic institution. So I'll give you one example. When I was teaching at Harvard, I made the apparently a mistake. I don't think so, but apparently a mistake in referring to America as a melting pot. I grew up thinking about how America was a melting pot. My parents wanted to assimilate. My parents, legal immigrants, wanted to, whether it was learning English or whether it was being involved in the community, they wanted to be American. That's what I grew up with. I learned we had a lot in common, a lot of values in common, and therefore let's focus on what we have in common. I was told America's not a melting pot. Administrators at Harvard informed me, as did students, that actually America's a mixed salad. And Adam, you can be a crouton, I can be a cucumber, so-and-so can be a carrot, and we retain our identities. And yet we can play well together, but we are all separate. I think that focuses on our differences, not our commonalities. I'm a big believer America's a great nation with unbelievable values. Equal opportunity for all. I'm not about equal outcomes. And so this identity-driven politics, I think, is dividing our country in a really nasty way. And it's a problem.
If President Trump takes the White House again and wants to severely curtail American involvement with NATO, are you on board with him with that?
Well, I think we need to talk about what that means, curtailment. Does that mean Europe pays their fair share? I'm all about that. Absolutely. America should not be subsidizing the Europeans in their security. Now, if it's America paying its fair share and being part of NATO, I think NATO is actually doing a good job. I think what we need to do is make sure that the Europeans pay their fair share and we don't overpay. This is about taxpayer dollars. We have too much debt. And so every dollar we allocate to something, we need to think about it as a borrowed dollar, Adam. And if we think about it that way, a standard for allocating American dollars abroad has to be higher, and it cannot support endless wars. Now, I do believe American strength creates a safer, more prosperous world for everyone. And so a strong America, including a strong NATO, I think will make the world safer and prevent wars, not provoke wars. And so that's how I think about it.
All right. Vikram Sharmani, thanks for joining us on Close Up. We appreciate the time here.
Great. Thanks, Adam.
All right. And we'll be right back with a Republican running in the 1st District, Chris Bright.